All right, so I can just like start. So I'll just say like, well, so this is the third part of Hack School. We're going over DOM and React, taught by Thomas, Henry, and Maggie today. So yeah, and that's the checking code if you have not signed in. I'll put it down in the chat too, so we can feel free to just move on to the next slide.
Yep, these are the slides, and this is the repo for the second part of our demonstration. Awesome. So we're going to get started by talking about what is the DOM. And so the DOM, it's the document object model, and it's basically what you see on a web page. But before we do that, we're going to talk about what we previously learned. So in workshop 1, we talked about HTML, tags, and we just reviewed that in the Kahoot. So as Shrevin and Daniel were saying, so this entire thing is the HTML tag, and the source is an attribute, and it's where the image is. We have anchor tags, which are basically just like links. We have H1s, which are headers, like large headers. We have forms, which allow for like sending data through like text boxes. And we have divs to categorize like the DOM basically, and I'll explain that a little more later. Awesome. So then we also learned about CSS, where that's like how you style things. And so we learned that you can select how to style things with classes and IDs. And so in this example, we have a section where we have a paragraph that says this text will be red, and it's because the class is red, and in the CSS file, we would have .red, color red. So this behind the scenes will give this an attribute called styles, and it will give it color red. And we can keep going. So this would also be red because it has the class. But this text in between doesn't have the class, and it doesn't have the ID header. Or well, actually, so it would be in Calibri, but that's because it's part of this div. So yeah, we can continue. Or actually, does anyone have any questions about CSS and HTML? Just very quickly. You can also speak up as well, yeah. Awesome, so I'm just gonna assume we're good. Okay, so then we also decided we should go over arrow functions real quick. So this is what an arrow function looks like, and this would be an example. So we set the function with let or const, and this is the parameter called main, and we send it to a brackets, and we have the code inside here, which is basically the same thing as saying function greeting of name, the brackets console log hello name. And so this is how you would call it. It's the same way as if it was a function. So this is how we could convert from a function to an arrow function. And so we do this just by taking out the function keyword, adding let, putting an equal sign, and putting an arrow. And we can keep simplifying if it's a one-liner to not even include the brackets. So this is extremely clean code, and that's one reason to use it. And then we also, so in the Kahoot you saw the map function. So with an array, you can have a map, filter, reduce, index of. There's a lot of different higher order functions that you can use. And so with filter, what we're doing is we're saying this array Pokemon has objects, and each object has a key value pair. And we're going through each object and we're saying if the Poke level is greater than or equal to 51, we're just arbitrarily saying it's powerful. So what this will do is this will create another array, and it will contain Daniel and Shrevin because they're both pretty epic and powerful. So any questions on arrays in general or objects as well? Okay, we're gonna keep, why is Daniel higher level than Pika? Because Daniel is epic. Okay. All right, so now we're going to actually start talking about the DOM. So as I said before, it's the document object model, and it's how we structure the HTML document. So what you see on a website. And so the way it's structured, sorry, I'm reading chat. The way it's structured is basically like a tree, but upside down. So we got a root with a document, and the root element is HTML. And then from the HTML, you can have head and body. And so in the head, you typically put what's known as metadata. So data about the data. So this could be like UTF encoding or just the title itself. You don't really have to worry too much about that right now. Mainly you're worried about the body. So what is actually in the document itself. So in the body, you can put elements with tags, like how we've been seeing before with HTML. And the way it's structured is you can have divs with sections and more branches pointing downwards. So in this example, we have an anchor tag with an attribute and text, each one with some text. So keep going. And so yeah, as I was saying before, it's basically just an upside down tree. And as we'll see later, when we start our activity, you can access these elements by choosing this element and saying it's child nodes. So basically, in this example, child node, this would be child node of 0, and this would be child node of 1. And so in JavaScript, right, in arrays, it's pretty typical that we start at 0, and then we go up like 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, so these are siblings when you can count them like 0, 1, 2, 3. So I thought I would just quickly go through an example of changing the DOM. So in this really, really very simple example, all we have is 2 words, demo and meow. And what I wanted to show was that if you hit Control-Shift-I on Windows, you can actually see the structure itself, and you can edit it as well. By saying add attribute, for example, or just double clicking. And so, yeah, this is actually super, super powerful tool that you're definitely going to be using soon. So typical starting, right? Hello world. And boom, it prints out. So in terms of just what I wanted to show here, we have a demo with ID demo. We have, and it has a class paragraph, right? ID cat and class paragraph as well. So what we can do to access, for example, the demo, we could say document.getElement by ID, and you can see like autocomplete with tab or enter. Type in demo, we could say .enter HTML, for example, and set this here, actually. So we can change this like on the fly, basically. What do we want to say? What do we want to say? Hack school, mom. Okay, I'm gonna say both mom and Daniel. Mom, Daniel. And look, it edits here, and when you highlight over it, it will show you here as well. So yeah, this is one way to modify the DOM. The other most other common way to do it is with classes. So it would be get elements by class name. You could also do tag name as well. And in this case, what you'll realize, I'll print this right now so that you can see, is this is actually a list of all the elements with the class name paragraph. So here we go. This shows, you can click on this. The Chrome DevTools is like super powerful in terms of debugging. And so you can actually say, since it's a list, you can say like of 0, and you get the first element. So since Mom Daniel and Meow are siblings, you say 0 and 1. And that's, yeah. So that's how you could use getElements class name by ID. And then in the next example, basically what this does, I will explain once I get it set up real quick. So in this example, we're going through, and it's a way of conditionally rendering to the DOM. So we have a button, and we have an attribute called onClick, and you can set this to a function. And when setting to a function, you can pass in this, and what this is basically just your button itself, like you're passing in the whole tag. And so in a script I defined, right, I made a click. The ID is just the button itself, as I said. And we can change the cat to be red, and then id.style.color is the button, so the button will turn red, and it will say hey when you click it. So we can see that, and boom. Yay. So next, we want it to be, we took your feedback a lot, so we definitely understand. We're gonna have some more interaction. So here we go. Basically, what we want you guys to do is I'll put the link in chat to the ACM Hack website. And right now it is under construction. And so we want you guys to construct it using child node, and I think it's mostly class names. So here I provided like an example. So I can show that real quick. Let's see here. Okay, so put this in chat. Oh, it's in chat. Just kidding. Okay. Okay, so the first thing you do when you go here, Control-Shift-I, right? You can click on the body to see the root. So you can tell this is made in React because this is typical React structural, as we'll learn later. But you can keep clicking, or you can click this button right here, and this will let you click on, for example, ACM Hack, and you'll get H1 class landing ACM Hack. So say we wanted to change this, right? So one example we might use is the class name. Oops. And we would, what is the class landing title? And we'd say of 0 because it's the first element of this class name. And inner HTML. And what do we want to call this? What do we want to call it? Denny. Okay. There we go. Denny. And it shows up right here. It's awesome. And so one last thing before you guys go off, we're going to go off into Discord, by the way. So before we do that, though, I think this is already ready. So there's also this thing called snippets. So if you go into your Control-Shift-I, typically you'll be in the elements. If you're not already, then you can just click on elements or this button to bring it up. And so you can go to sources, create a new snippet, and then you're basically typing in the console here. But instead of typing in the console one by one, you can have all of them execute at the same time. So it's like you're like injecting a script basically. And so then you hit run here, and boom, it like edits. In this example, I think I made a cat. Oh yeah, I made a cat here. So yeah, we really want to see like the creativity here. So yeah, like I showed, you can change the source of an image. Shoot, it's like very zoomed in, but so right here we have the image, and basically what you can do is you can take this class, and then you'd say its first child would be there's a left image over here, and its second child is the right image, which is right here, and its third child is a div, etc. And if you didn't want to, if this was hard to look at, for example, you could console log the whole thing. And once I do this, we'll get started. Wait, sorry. Yeah, documents dot get elements by class name, and what was this called? Backdrop wrapper. So yeah, and then you can click on this and see all of the values. So yeah, to be more clear, you would probably do of 0 right here. And then you can click on the div and see all the nodes. So yeah, do we want to get started with that? I'd say yes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's
Awesome.
do it.
So yeah,
If you, real quick, if any of you are new and are not in the Discord, can you type that in chat and then type in your, actually here, let me just send a Discord that.
so yeah, we want you guys to join the voice channels, and if you have any questions like whatsoever, whether it be about JavaScript or HTML, modifying the DOM, definitely just ask. Maybe if there's somebody already asking a question, go to a different hack desk and ping us or something. Totally feel free to join right now. Awesome.
Yeah. And I was saying if you're just joining the hack Discord, then just type in chat that you just joined, and we'll give you the hack school role. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't see
Okay.
like all these voice channels, please text us because
Yeah.
we need to give you guys a role.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll do this
All right.
activity for like 5 minutes. Just play around with manipulating the HTML and try to get as creative as possible. And if you want, post a picture of whatever you make in the Discord, and
Let's do it.
we can
Please
see what
post a picture.
spiciness we make.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll be back at 4:36.
Yeah, 4:36. Everyone back here.
All right. Okay.
Is Henry's group back?
Okay. Henry is still presenting, I think. Okay. Henry is still presenting. Let me hey Henry, try to wrap it up in like within like a minute or two, and then okay. Okay, he'll wrap it up in like a minute or two. So we good. Let's wait a little bit. What did everyone make? Any interesting screenshots? No.
We got a lot of AMC hacks.
AMC has.
Yeah.
AMC hat.
Yeah. The
Oh
better
my God.
AMC.
What the heck?
All right, let's see this, Bryce.
Ooh, Bryce. Oh yeah, Anish messed with the root element. That's so funny. And he just did find element by ID root equal.
Posting in the
Oh my
Discord is better than on Zoom.
Yeah. Ooh, AMC heck. I love that.
All right, so I'll go ahead and share my screen for the next part of the workshop. Cool. So y'all can see my screen, right? Just making sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Cool.
You're good.
So yeah, now that we've gone over using the DOM to manipulate our web page, we're going to take that a step further, and we're going to use React to create this sort of modular front end for our Pokemon generator application. And so what that means by modular is that we're basically going to split up the web page into these different parts that we can manipulate independently, and then basically just rearrange it so that we can have a better sort of like this user interface for our application. So first, we want to talk about what is React. So React is this framework that we use to build our user interface. And so what that means, it's basically the front end of our application, which is what our users see and can interact with. And so React is a component-based framework, not just in a visual sense, but also for state management. So what that means is that components are these sort of independent, reusable pieces that make up the user interface. I like to think of them as jigsaw puzzle pieces because they each have their own sort of like shape and properties. And then once they all come together, they form this single image of the entire web page. And so, yeah, so each component also has their own state, which controls how it is rendered on the page. So this basically takes the form of these certain like variables that can like manage how the component would render in terms of like maybe the color or maybe some other certain properties. And yeah, and so since each component is also independent, it's a lot easier to fine tune specific parts of the user interface that we want. So for like example, in this little diagram right here, we go from this like single web page to split into these different components. And then we can manipulate each one of these different components to change the certain properties or maybe say change the HTML. Yeah. And so why do we use React? So React is one of the most commonly used front-end frameworks out there on the internet. There's lots of documentations and guides on how to use React and how to work with it. And it's also a really important front-end development skill. A lot of companies in the industry actually use React because it's very modern and it's very efficient for web applications. So it's definitely an important skill to put on your application or on your resume, especially in terms of like creating projects. And so another reason why we would use React is that the components that we can create, they can be imported and reused over and over much more easily. So instead of writing a ton of like duplicate code that would be repeated, you can just have it in one spot and then basically import that code into, say, another file. And it's much easier than having to copy and paste it over and over again. Lastly, one of the main reasons why we use React is because it's really efficient. It has something what's known as automatic update on state change. So say if you update a component state, say you update like a certain property of it, like the color, it only re-renders those components that changed, not anything else on the page, which makes loading up the page a lot faster. And like I said, it's an automatic sort of process, so you don't actually have to manually create code for updating the page or set up listeners for the changes that you make. So yeah, and then for an image, the HTML and CSS doesn't need to load JS if the HTML and CSS already are in JS. So do we have any questions so far? Let me pull up the chat if I can. Yeah, cool. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Either myself or the rest of the Hack Squad will be able to answer them. But yeah. So now that we've gone over some of like the sort of basics of React and what it does and how we use it, we can go over how we actually convert HTML to React code. So this is just a classic example of an HTML file that we went over previously in like workshop 1. So you have like your HTML tags, you have a head with a link to a style sheet, and you have a body which has like a div element as well as an image and a picture. And so like here, you have sort of these like external components that you can like import, such as the style sheet, which you import in the head. HTML is very tag based. In HTML, your comment style is through the use of angle brackets as well as an exclamation point and dashes. So right here, you see that I'm so down for boba now is a comment. That is very true right now. I wish I could have boba right now. And then additionally, in HTML, your code can't really be reused. If you want to say like repeat this div right here, you're going to have to rewrite it again or like copy and paste it. So this can lead to some pretty like large files that you really don't want to deal with. So once we convert this to React, we get something that seemingly looks about the same size, but it's a lot more flexible. So up here, you can see in this JSX file. And so one thing to note about React is that with React, HTML is now JSX, which means that it's HTML, but it has the added functionality of being able to interweave JavaScript code into the HTML. And so one thing you want to note is that external components like CSS, you can now import them through import statements like in JavaScript. So you don't have to have like a link element that manually like attaches like the style sheet to your HTML code. It's component based. So as you can see right here, this is our components for our HTML code that returns what our HTML code is. Another thing is the comment style is a lot similar to JavaScript. You can use double slashes or you can use the slash asterisk for block comments. So it's a lot easier to remember because it's just like a normal sort of like comment style. Another thing you want to note is that instead of class, like you have in HTML, say like right here, instead in React, it will be class name. And so the reason for this is that in JavaScript, class is actually a keyword. So that is why you have to change class to class name if you want class name to actually work for your HTML code. And this is also true for a couple of other attributes like for, and I think a couple of other ones that we can go on, that we'll be going over later on in the workshop. And so another thing, probably one of the most important things about these components is that they can only return one overall DOM element. So as you can see here, if we didn't have this sort of div wrapping around the image in the paragraph, this code wouldn't work because this would be returning 2 elements instead of 1. So in order for this to actually render on the web page, you have to have like this sort of like wrapper tag around your elements in order to make sure it works. So yeah, just make sure that when you're writing in React code, you want to make sure that you only have one overall element that you're returning. And so lastly, besides that, the HTML for this food cravings component is now an object that we can use. And so we can use this code and basically reuse it in other components. And so, yeah, and so we'll be going over what that means later on as well with this sort of export statement as well. So do we have any questions up until here? I could. Why is I a different car in the p tag? I think that was just a mistake in terms of like the slide coloring. It doesn't actually do anything different in this, I think. So you don't have to worry about that. It's completely fine. This is just a slide issue, I think. So yeah. So yeah. Yeah, cool. So now we're actually going to get started in setting up React for our project. So if you would go ahead and pull up VS Code or say a terminal, like I have right here, what you're going to want to do is basically set up this React app. And so make sure you have your files from the previous workshop one with the create Pokemon main.css and view Pokemon HTML. Make sure you go to that directory and then run this command. And then once you do that, it'll start setting up this sort of like starter code for your React application. So I think we could probably take a couple of minutes right now to go into the Discord just to make sure we don't have any issues setting it up. If that's all right. So yeah, we'll probably take like 3 to 5 minutes to go into the Discord and just like run these commands just to make sure that these work. And yeah, so yeah, we'll probably just go into the Discord right now.
Yeah, it should be really simple, just like 2 commands you type in. So
yeah. Okay. Oh, and then someone asked a question real quick in the chat. If one of y'all want to take that.
So is the order of things that appear on the web page based on the order you export it? So it doesn't really matter in terms of the order that you export it. What matters is like sort of like normal HTML. If you say import a components that's like, and you put it like after like a paragraph element, then that's going to determine the order like in that sense. But in terms of like the actual like order, like say in the slides, like right here, like in our import statements, no, that doesn't really matter. As long as you like import everything before you like start writing the rest of your code, you should be okay. So yeah, we'll go into the Discord real quick and set up the React app. React application running. And so basically once that happens, once your React application is started, any changes you make to the files and once you save them, it'll automatically refresh the application. So you don't have to worry about having to say like restart the application if you already made changes. So yeah. Now that we've set up React locally on our computers, I'll go more in depth on what components actually are. So right here, you have an example of what a component is. And so what these components are, like I mentioned before, they're blocks on your web page that do different things that you can manipulate freely and basically sort of like rearrange them. And so in React, there are 2 types of components. There's functional and there's class. Right here is an example of what a functional component is. And so the way that they render HTML code with functions or with functional components, it's using a return statement like this. And with class components, it's using a method called render. But for now, all you need to worry about is that we'll be using a functional component. So I'm noticing that there's some stuff in chat, so I'll go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, never mind. Cool. So yeah, so these are components. They render HTML code using a return statement. So yeah, more on functional components. We are choosing to use functional components for our workshop series and for our project because they're a lot simpler to work with. They follow standard JavaScript function syntax, so it's a lot easier to understand for people who are new to JavaScript. And they're usually written with an arrow function, which we covered in the last workshop. And so they render our HTML, or in this case, JSX code with a return statement, and that's how we do that. They keep track of the actual component's states with these sort of things called hooks to state variables. So you don't need to really know too much about them right now, other than the fact that this is how we keep track of like that particular component's variables in terms of like how they like help render the sort of component. And lastly, because we're using JavaScript function syntax, it's usually a lot of shorter, cleaner code. And so yeah. My Zoom backgrounds. Okay. But yeah, so going more into like functional components, this is a sort of example of what a functional component will look like. And so as you can see here, it takes in something called props, which we'll be going over later on in this in the workshop with Maggie. And it returns this HTML code using the props. So it returns this div. And so you notice here, this is that reason that I mentioned earlier before, where we have to return only one element. So we have to make sure that we wrap this whole like mess of code into one div element. And so you'll see here that it returns an header, an image, and a paragraph. So as you can see here, it's pretty clean code. It's fairly easy to understand, and because of that, it's really easy to debug. The only cons of having functional components is that we will need to learn hooks later on. Any questions so far? If not, then I'll keep moving on to the next portion of our live coding. Props. Yeah, so props is basically these certain like values that you can pass to a component. And once they're passed to the component, you can use those within the actual component itself to like set stuff, set certain values, and basically manipulate them. And so yeah, we'll definitely be going more over that later on during the workshop when Maggie starts explaining those. But for now, just know that there's something that you pass in to the function. Okay. Cool. So for our project, our Pokemon generator, we're going to be splitting up our project into these different components. So as you can see here, we are going to have a navbar component, which basically keeps track of the navbar. Later on in the next workshop, we'll be going over the actual Pokemon themselves. So a Pokemon card, which displays all of the information for the Pokemon, as well as a component for the moves themselves. Another thing to keep in mind is that the entire web page itself is a component on its own. And so yeah, so now that we've discussed components pretty in depth, we're going to put it into practice, and we're going to create our own navbar component. So for the most part, it's just going to be translating the HTML code to Java or to React, which should mainly just be copy and paste, as well as just wrapping it inside a component. So go ahead and switch to Discord and do that. And we'll probably spend about 5 to 10 minutes on this, I think. So yeah.
That a single page can contain many components. So how exactly do we put these components together? So you notice in the example that we provided before, in the food cravings.jsx, there was this one line. It says export default food cravings. That's what allows us to use the component food cravings in other components. So the syntax of exporting goes like export default, and then whatever the name you want to call the component that you just exported. So if we want to export this component, we need to import it in another component, right? So realize that the import statement goes like import whatever the component name is from a certain path. So this path over here is the relative path from food cravings to whatever file we are using to put in food cravings. So these two names need to match, otherwise JavaScript will not recognize what component you are trying to input. So if you exported food cravings, you need to import food cravings from here. So as you realized, in the return statement, we can put food cravings just like an HTML tag. Notice that it does not have an open or closing bracket. It's self-closing, and you can use like as many HTML tags as you want. React does not have a limit on that currently, and yeah, the same component can be used multiple times throughout whatever section you want in here, and that way you can save a lot of code. Also, one thing to note is that even the outer component can be exported. So you are importing food cravings in food cravings repeat, and then you can also import food cravings repeat in other components, maybe like food cravings repeat. Just like technically, you can just you can render components in components. There's like, is there questions in chat? Yeah. So because we can render components in components, so I'd like to ask which files can decide what's the content that ends up being displayed on our React app. So I'll give you 30 seconds to answer it. Feel free to spam the answer in chat or whatever. Okay. I'm seeing 2 people saying ease, and this is actually kind of a tricky question. So technically the answer should be E because, well, as long as you export a component, you import it in another component and that component ends up being rendered, all of these like exported components will make up your final page. So what this question is trying to say is, if you look closely at the file structures, so what ultimately decides the content to be displayed is index.js. So in index.js, we return a component that's called app, which is defined in app.js. So if you, for example, if we have defined maybe like 3 components and we want to only to render one of them on our page, we put that in app.js. And the reason why I asked this question is it's gonna be helpful in this part. So right now, as we mentioned above, like before, a page can also be a component. So right now, as you have wrote the HTML code for create Pokemon in workshop 1, we can turn it into a React component as well. So once you have finished this page, you can import the create Pokemon component to source/app.js and render it in the return statement. And a couple of keywords, as we mentioned earlier, we can change the word class to class name and for to HTML4 and value to default value. So I can give you guys 5 to 10 minutes to work on that onto the Discord, and then where we can help you guys out if you have any questions. Component, it's pretty easy to realize that it's kind of a little boring here because we can only return the exact same over and over. So is there any way that we can make our components more dynamic? So the answer is yes. We have states and props that help create the dynamic, make the components more dynamic. So a state is an object that is local to every React component. So when a state is updated, the component will also update at the same time. You can think of state as a local variable of a function. So it determines the current state of the function. So another thing which we'll be focusing on more today is props. So the props will be parameters that's being passed down. They can be passed down from parent to child. And anytime the props are updated, any components with those props will also be updated. So you can think about props are kind of like parameters that define a function. So it's kind of what can make each component appear uniquely. So as we mentioned, props is Oh, if you want me to see the previous slide, yeah, that's my bad for pausing the screen share. So here's the state and here's the props. And you can see that state is more like the local variables of a function, and props is more like the parameters that can define functions, which makes everything unique. So state will be saved mostly for workshop 4, and props will be diving more deeply into today. So yeah, props. So props is what we can use to customize our components to take in certain properties. And for example, over here, you can see 3 meme song objects, but they all have these like titles, cover images, and song links, which are the props that we can define. So we can see that even though they are all meme song objects, they can have different titles, different cover images, and different song links, which is what props can do. So this can save us a lot of code and make our components very distinct from each other. So how do we define the meme song that can let us call it like this? So remember from earlier, we have an example that talks about the meme song component with the props. So in here, we have the props.title, which is the title prop in H1. And then we have the cover image defined here, which defines the source of the image, and the song link prop that defines the link to the song. So notice that the names defined here have to match the names of the properties that we use here. So if we have the title property, the cover image property, and the song link property, we need to define them when we call them in other components. Otherwise, they will not be loaded. And these portions, because these portions do not contain any calls to props, they will remain the same no matter where our props are. So yeah, with these like unique props, we will be able to define 3 meme songs that are completely different from each other. And this is kind of a demonstration of what unique props can make our meme song components look like. So as we mentioned before, one of the best things about React is code reusability. So if you guys have in the process of making the component of create Pokemon, you might realize that we used a lot of lines to make up the type selectors and also the types of the Pokemons. How can we improve this? So one of the things that we can use is using the type component, which I will be live coding. So I'm gonna screen share my VS Code, which you can see right now. It has a lot of the lines just for an option selector. So what we're doing here is we create a component called type. Type.jsx. So of course, like any other React component, we need to do import React from React. If you guys have any questions at any point, please feel free to ask away in the chat. Again, const type. That is how we declare a component. And then, of course, we will have a default return statement. And then at the bottom, we need to export this export default type, right? So I'll give you guys like 20 seconds to type this up. So what we want to return in this statement is exactly what we have here, right? So we'll have a select with this many options. So we can literally just copy this over here. And then we paste this. But the IDs and name will be changed later on. So once we define the properties. So if you notice that the type and the name are unique, basically, for every select that we have. And they basically have the same thing over here. So we can use ID as a prop that we can use in type. So props. And then if you look at the example that we have on the slides, we can use the prop ID prop by calling props.id. And same over here. So at this point, we can import the type component from type. So we do this. We can import type from components type. This path might be different depending on where you put type and the create Pokemon, but make sure to type in the relative location of type to create Pokemon. So right now we can get rid of this repetitive code. So instead of this long section of select, we can just use type ID equals to type1. And remember that the tags are self-closing. So you can just do this instead of this. Actually, like, I'm not even sure if this will work. So just put them as a self-closing tag. Same here for all the other selects that are on this page. So take some time to do that as well. Changing type 2.
Oh, I think you accidentally deleted a div under type 2.
That's type 2. Which div?
Yeah, like under type 2, like the current line you're on, you need to add a closing div.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Make sure to change the IDs for every type component that you have here, because that's what makes each type component unique. So that will be move 2. That will be move 3. And that will be move 4. So if we look at what the page looks like right now, it looks exactly the same, but the code is much more organized. So I will switch back to the code for now. Yes, the final code will be on GitHub. So there's a repository called Haskell FA20 Solutions on the ACM UCSD GitHub. If one of you can like put the link in the chat, that will be really nice. And yeah, we will also be pushing the solution code to the Haskell FA20 main repository and on Discord. So there's one more thing that we can consider. Hold on. So because a Pokemon can have only one type, well, can have one or two types, and it can have any range from 1 to 4 moves. So we can further specify this by making the type 2 and moves 2 to 4 type optional. So the way that we do this is by adding an empty option. This can be kind of confusing to explain right now, but if you have any questions that you like the mentors to further explain, feel free to drop by at any office hours. So we will need an array of the IDs that can be empty. So we will call this array default empties. So let's define default empties to be move 2 because it can be type 2, sorry. Type 2, move 2, move 3, and move 4 because these are the types that we want to be optional. And now we want to create an empty option. So we declared the empty option here. So how do we include the empty option only for those whose IDs are in the default empties? So remember in JavaScript arrays, we have this function called include. So what we can do here is default empties includes. So remember that the unique identifier for each type component is the ID. So what we're doing over here is checking if the ID of the current type component is in the default empties array. If so, we'll let empty option be a literally empty option. And then what we need to do to include an empty option over here is by including it over here. So what this line of code does is basically inputting the empty option object in here, which is either non-existent or an literal empty option. So we're gonna save the code over here. And If you guys have any questions about what this part is doing, feel free to ask. Thanks for pointing this out. So if you now look at the page, that which I will share right now, the type 2 and move 2 and move 3 and move 4 options can now be empty. So without this line, everything will default to normal, which is not what we want in case the Pokemon only has one type or one move. If everyone's good with this part of coding, that's like the last coding session that we have for this workshop. So we're done for this time, and next time we will learn about APIs and states and a lot of more things about cool things about React. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Trevin, do you have any?
No, I think we're good. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah.
Next week we will be doing Express and APIs, creating our Pokemon API, so that we can actually start storing some Pokemon and start displaying some Pokemon. So yeah, we'll be doing APIs for the first part with Express and Node.js, and then we'll be doing a second part of React for the second half of the workshop, where we'll be actually showing the Pokemon components. So
yeah, I also dropped the feedback form in the chat, so please fill that out for this workshop, just so we kind of, just so we can kind of see what else we can do, see what y'all liked about it, what y'all didn't like. And Henry, I think he also mentioned he has office hours at 7. So if there was any of the code today like you weren't able to finish, I highly recommend coming to his office hours and just being like, Henry, I need help, and he'll help you out. But yeah. All right.